Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Indigenous Perspectives. I'm Nadine Greinig, and I am your moderator tonight. If you've been to these before, then of course you've seen me before. um, I'm coming to you from Omaha, Nebraska. I'm actually attending the National Indian Education Association annual convention here, and we have, I hear, over 1,000 people attending. It's a virtual and an on-site convention. I think people just miss so much getting together and having that time to interact with each other. I know I did. So I'm really glad to be here. We made it okay. Southwest did not cancel our flight, so I'm very happy about that. And this is brought to you by our sponsor, Save Our Schools Arizona, and the network. And we are here. Save Our Schools Arizona is about making sure that our tax dollars actually go to fund public schools as they were meant to be, and try to stop the bleeding of all of those funds going into voucher programs going to private schools. And there's a variety of reasons for that. If you want to find out more about that, of course, you can go to Save Our Schools Arizona Network um, and find out more, or you can contact me or any of these representatives, I'm sure, can answer your questions as well. So going to this session today is about the impact of legislation and Arizona politics on Indigenous communities here in the state. Here in the state, I'm in Nebraska. I still feel like I'm in Arizona. But a lot of these are similar laws. I'm sure that they have in other states as well that can apply. So I'm going to go ahead and start by introducing our panelists and um, just giving a short bio. Everybody will have an opportunity to say a little bit more about themselves if they'd like. And then, we'll get into it because there's a lot to talk about. So our first person on the panel is Jasmine Blackwater Nygren. She is one of Arizona State Representatives in Arizona's 7th District. She's a member of the Navajo Nation, and she was appointed to the seat earlier this year to replace incumbent Democrat Orlando Teller, who resigned to take a job in the Biden administration. At age 25, this made her Arizona's youngest lawmaker. Representative Blackwater Nygren earned her undergraduate degree in 2017 from Stanford University and graduated in 2020 from the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. She also worked for the Navajo Nation Office of Legislative Counsel and the Navajo Nation Supreme Court. So welcome, Representative Blackwater Nygren. And our next panelist is Jennifer Germain. She's an American politician and a Native American politician and a Democratic member of the Arizona House of Representatives, representing District 18 since January 14th of 2019. Germain was elected in 2018 to succeed incumbent Republican State Representative Jill Norgaard. Representative Germain graduated from Arizona State University and is the founder of Stronger Together Arizona and the We the People Summit. She is a member of the White Earth Nation of Northwestern Minnesota and resides in Chandler, Arizona. Welcome. And so our third panelist is Senator Jamesita Peshlikai. She's a Democratic member of the Arizona State Senate, serving since 2017, representing District 7, which includes the Navajo Nation and Hopi Reservation. Senator Peshlikai lives in Cameron, Arizona. She previously served in the Arizona House of Representatives from 2013 until 2015. Senator Peshlikai is a member of the Navajo Nation, and she earned her bachelor's degree from Northern Arizona University in 1998 and her master's degree in educational psychology in 2004. Peshlikai served in the U.S. Army from 1989, not 1899, 1989 to 1997. She served in the Persian Gulf War from 1990 to 91. After leaving the Army, she became lead coordinator for Navajo Nation Traditional Agricultural Outreach, a nonprofit group. She was also involved in protests of development in the San Francisco Peaks, such as the Arizona Snow Bowl. So welcome, Senator Peshlikai. So welcome all of my guests. I'm really glad to have you on the panel today. I appreciate your time. I know you're all very busy people, and this is going to be, I think, a really good discussion. So Representative Blackwater Nygren, would you like to say a little bit more about yourself? Say hello.
Sure. Good evening to everyone who is listening. Yate. As previously mentioned, I'm Representative Jasmine Blackwater Nigran, representing Legislative District 7. My seatmates are Senator Peshlikai and Representative Sosi. I'm very excited to be here and be speaking with all of you. Again, I was appointed back in February, so this is my first legislative session. It was a whirlwind. Definitely felt like drinking water from a fire hose. So very excited to be a part of this discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Representative Germain, would you like to say something?
Yeah. Bonjour, Ginawa. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Jennifer Germain from Legislative District 18. I'm in my second term serving in the House of Representatives from Chandler, Arizona, and I also represent Tempe, Mesa, and the Ahwatukee portion of Phoenix.
Terrific. Thank you so much for being here. Senator Peshlikai, good to see you again. Thank you for being on the panel today. You are muted. There you go.
Thank you. I don't have any more words to add. I think your intro was pretty lengthy. Thank you.
Yeah, I did say a little bit more about you. Maybe that's because you've been on a panel before.
Yeah, well, I think so.
Or you're a little bit older. I almost made you 100 years older.
I know. I feel like I've aged a century in the last 10 years, though. So you're kind of on correct.
I can imagine. There have been many challenges, to say the least, in recent years. So let me go ahead and start. So according to Cornell Law School's Legal Information Institute, federal law recognizes a special kind of Indian sovereign authority to govern themselves, subject to an overriding federal authority. So Indian tribes are considered by federal law to be domestic dependent nations. Congress enacted the sovereign authority in order to protect Indian groups from state authority. So I could see somebody hearing that for the first time, maybe having a mixed message there. Then maybe we can address that a little bit as we go along. But I have a couple of questions about this issue of protection from state authority. Can you help our audience understand the interplay between the laws related to sovereign authority of Indigenous people and state law? So Senator Peshlikai, I'd like to start with you. How does state law impact Native communities? And help us understand how the state and the sovereign laws work together or don't. You're on mute, sorry.
Thank you for the question. It's really a complex issue. And I think one of the things that folks need to understand is that there are over 500 tribes in the United States alone, each one starting from the East Coast to the West Coast came into contact with those that were not of the Americas, colonizers often, as they're often referred to. And during that time, there was different policies that address the Indian issue, I guess is how they would have framed it during that time. And depending on what the policy was how the tribes were approached. For my tribe, the Navajo Nation, we were hunters and fighters, and we fought the government and the pioneers up until mid 1850s. And then we became prisoners of war, those that survived roundups and Kit Carson. And when the Navajos signed a treaty with the United States government, they signed a treaty saying they were a sovereign nation and they had a nation-to-nation relationship with the government. So right now, as the laws that pass in the state of Arizona, they pass in the areas that are under the jurisdiction of the state of Arizona. when you step onto federal tribal land, that is not the case. We do not have it, and this is really complex, and it's almost issue by issue, like the Amber Alert for children that are missing on the Navajo Nation. It was only up until I think 2017 or 18 when the horrendous case up in Shiprock of I forget the little Ashland Mike occurred. Then we created an MOU for the jurisdictions of public safety to work together. And so the tribes are really adamantly safeguard their sovereignty. And so I know in my district we have the Hopi tribe that are that have a different relationship with the government. And so, but as Native Americans, I think it is really insulting to be considered dependents or wards of the nation that conquered you. And so, you know, there's just these stereotypes that persist. And yet, with Indigenous people, the United States government and in fact, the globe would not be in the place that they are were it not for Indigenous peoples. So we do have a hard time with that phrase, and it needs to be done away with.
Yes, I agree with that. And the confusion or the contradiction that I was referencing is, you know, we're known as sovereign nations, yet we're dependent on the federal government. So that those two terms seem to be a conflict. And I think, I know many people don't understand what it means to be a sovereign tribal nation. You know, what does that mean? And a lot of conflict comes into play when you talk about education and education funding. So Representative Germain, would you like to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and to add on to what Senator Peshlikai was saying, we've seen abuses in the past from the state, especially from the state of Arizona, where it comes to voting rights and trying to use the trust agreement between the federal government and our tribal nations as a justification for denying Native Americans voting rights. And we've seen this in every state. My grandfather was born in Minnesota. He was a citizen of the United States, yet he wasn't able to vote until after the 1965 Voting Rights Act, because he was a tribal citizen, even though he was not living on tribal land at that point.
So the law was used against him, basically.
Yeah, the trust status, the dependency status was used against him to deny him the right to vote.
Right.
And this is something that we've seen throughout history within the United States, and it's been used against many communities, not just Native Americans, but our disability community, many communities. And it's something that creates a second tier of citizenship of this country, and it needs to stop.
Well, especially since we were here first. I'll just say that, make that point very quickly. So I was talking about, or I asked about a little bit about the differences in education funding. I mean, I mentioned at the outset that there's, you know, that Save Our Schools Arizona is trying to keep federal, public schools using the tax dollars that we all pay in public schools, as opposed to having them go to private schools through vouchers. And when I talk to people in my role, the current role is the CEO of Suncline Consulting, but prior to that, I was the director of Indian education for the state. And people would always often ask me, well, if they're sovereign, why don't they pay for the education? Why should we pay for the education? Why should the state pay for education of Native American people who live on reservations? So then again, that's gets complicated, right? So
yeah, and it's a dual citizenship issue. You're citizens of both nations, and our school districts cross boundaries. So there are public school districts that cross into our tribal reservations, and those are public school districts who serve people who live within the state of Arizona.
Great. Yes, I served them as a Title I specialist, and of course, as Indian Education Director there, many of my school districts were on reservations or bordered them. So Representative Blackwater Nygren, can you, I'm going to switch the subject a little bit about other issues outside of education. Can you tell us about the Ganado Loop project? It's H60 and other bills that you've run, or did you run that bill? No, that was one run in the past. But other bills that you've run to address transportation issues for Indigenous students, and why these projects still have not been funded by the state legislature.
Thank you for that question. And so because I was appointed in February, I didn't technically run any of my own bills. I kind of just adopted and fostered bills that former Representative Orlando Teller had introduced and ran. So I don't take ownership of his bills, even though I did my very best to support the bills that he had introduced in every way, which way I could in my brief time at the legislature. So I haven't had the opportunity to introduce or run my own bills, but former Representative Teller was a huge advocate for transportation in LD7, and he introduced a number of bills that would address many of the difficult and unpaved roads that exist within Legislative District 7, and two of those roads being Ganado Loop Road and Hopi Route 60. And Hopi routes, or let me start with Ganado Loop Road. And I believe Senator Peshlikai introduced a mirror bill in the Senate that would provide funding for that road as well. So Ganado Loop Road is technically a county road maintained and operated by Apache County. And for that reason, we had expected that the state legislature would be open to appropriating money to maintain and make improvements to that road. And it's not a very large road. It's a loop, if you can imagine, that connects the main highway to the school district. And Senator Peshlikai is probably more familiar with the actual road itself, but it's ridden with potholes and things like this, but it basically connects the main state highway to the school district and via like a loop road, and also connects the school district and a nearby hospital to the main highway. And then Ganado, Hopi Route 60 is about, I think it's 13 miles of unpaved road that connects Palaca, Arizona, which is on the Hopi Nation, to Low Mountain, Arizona, which is on the Navajo Nation. And so it crosses two separate tribal jurisdictions. It's completely within the state of Arizona, but it's technically owned and operated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, meaning that the state of Arizona does not maintain or make improvements to that road under, for example, the Arizona Department of Transportation. And from what I understand, this road has been a priority for both the Navajo and the Hopi Nation every year for the past several years, and that these nations request funding so that this road specifically can get funded. And it's one of the many routes on both reservations that desperately needs attention. It's unpaved, it's an earthen road, it gets washed out. I think as tribal nations, as tribal citizens, we can all we understand what it's like not to have paved roads. And so that's what Hopi Route 60 is. It's an unpaved road that desperately needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, it's kind of fallen through the cracks of both tribal governments and the BIA, meaning that it's not being funded currently, or it's not like on a priority list to be paved under either tribal government or the BIA. So it exists in this really unique space because it connects again two different tribal nations, and both tribes have not taken the steps to make it a priority to be paved under either government. And so in the past maybe 5 or 6 years, there's been attempts to get that road paved using state dollars. And in my brief experience here at the legislature, it was everybody in the legislature, I feel like, knows what Hopi Route 60 is because it's been pursued every year.
Mhm.
LD7 representatives try to advocate for funding for this road. And unfortunately, it never gets funded, again, because of the same reasons that we've been talking about. We're told that it's a tribal road, that the state doesn't need to be funding tribal roads, that it's a responsibility of either the tribal government or the federal government and not the state. And so every year we're told again and again that this is not a priority for the state, that the tribes have not invested enough in these roads themselves. And so for those reasons, I think that Hopi Route 60 has not been funded. And similar reasonings have been used for Ganado Loop Road, even though that road is technically a county road and it's completely within the jurisdiction of Apache County. So hope that answers your question. It's extremely frustrating, but definitely something that I continue to advocate for.
Yes, it does answer the question. Yes, I mean, it's further evidence that things can get complicated when you're talking about tribal issues. So the name of this session is The Impact of Legislation in Arizona Politics on Indigenous Communities. So with all of that you just said, and knowing it's an issue, these roads, what's the impact? If you're trying to get kids to school on these roads, what's the impact? You know, what's the impact on the transportation, on the buses, on the school district, et cetera, et cetera? Does anybody can take that question? Let us know, let your audience know, Senator Peshlikai, what the impact is of them not, whoever should be doing this, not doing it.
Thank you, Nadine.
Mhm.
You know, it really comes down to a simple and basic answer. It is leverage of resources, and that the resources, you have 90 legislators for 30 districts in the state of Arizona that come to the legislature, and each one of them is a person that has been elected because they promised the most to bring back to their district. And so it's basically a Thunderdome, to reference an old 1980s movie. You know, you go into the floor of the legislature and you fight for resources for your district. And those that are in the lead and in the majority that have the numbers, they reward themselves with resources. While those of us that are in the minority caucus, and then most especially the Indigenous legislators, what can be verbally leveraged, put against us, is that we are tribal people and that we should rely on the federal government to get this. So what that means is it gives the other legislators, and quite frankly, those watching on the TV channels, on the internet, they have this false idea implanted in their minds that we have unlimited access to federal dollars and that we just want more. We're just not happy. While in the meantime, the impact is less for our communities, less for our elders, less for our children. And Ganado Loop Road became an issue when I walked into a committee meeting, and I was told by a Republican legislator, well, that is on the reservation, right? And I said, yes. And she says, okay, well, why is it here? It should, you Indians have money. And so that kind of verbiage is ignorance, first of all. And second, it implants in the minds of people that there is a us and a them mentality. And so I really, I feel sorry for the state of Arizona when they are represented by people that do not understand the state they live in. And first of all is in indigenous homelands, indigenous sacred homelands. And many of our ancestors were killed in these cities that are the urban centers of our great state are built upon the bones and the remains of our people. And so when that kind of language, us versus them, or to me, you people, that puts into the mind of people that citizens watching is that they have, there's no responsibility of the state of Arizona to provide access to education, provide access to health care, provide these things that many of our leaders, native and non-native, federal, state, etc., have negotiated and come to an agreement. And these are contracts and obligations that need to be lived up to. And so it is quite unfortunate that this stereotype and stigma seems to continually remain alive in the legislature, and thus our communities are punished by this ignorance, and then they are also allowed to be neglected. But when the resources are taken from, say, Maricopa County, and then it becomes a real big problem for the legislators. So, for example, I'll get back to Navajo Generating Station. When Navajo Generating Station was closing, every legislator came to me, if not stated on the floor of the Senate or in committee, we will help Northern Arizona, LD7, the Navajo and the Hopi tribes, anybody impacted by this closure, we will help any way we can. And what that meant to me was passing legislation like paving a mile of Ganado Loop Road.
So we're only talking about a mile.
It's a mile. Yes, it's a mile. And then, you know, I was thinking finally we're gonna get help, but it didn't happen because, like I said, it's the war for resources, and so it's something that it doesn't come out, it doesn't change no matter the turnover of the legislature and the individuals. It's something that is in our society, it is across the world, and even the Latinos, the African Americans, the other minorities feel it too. But with the Native American legislators, I think it's especially difficult and challenging when you have so many state leaders that put it out there, this falsehood that we have federal dollars.
Yes,
Thank you,
they
Nadine.
definitely perpetuate misunderstandings and myths and things that they think are true, which really are not. So they aren't well educated. And for me, there's a responsibility, if you're representing your state, to become educated over all the issues of the people in your district and overall in the state. So there's a reason they don't have the knowledge coming in. To me, there's no good reason for them not attaining knowledge if they're going to be in those positions. That's just one person's opinion. Representative Germain, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, and Nadine, you had specifically asked how unpaved roads affect public education. And these are public school districts. School buses are very expensive. If they're driving on roads that have huge potholes and get washed out, that's broken axles, that's additional tires, that's wear and tear on the vehicles. And those school buses last a lot less years up in those areas than they do in urban areas where all the roads are paved and there's no pothole or there's little potholes. So if we're looking at impact to taxpayers, paving a road is going to save a lot more money than replacing a school bus every 5 years or replacing a broken axle 3 times a year.
But that just seems far too logical. I don't understand why people can't wrap their minds around it. You know, the lawmakers can't wrap their minds around that concept that you'll save a lot more money. Is it so political that people cannot see common sense? I mean, that's what's frustrating to me in that particular instance that you mentioned. So I'm going to kind of bring it back to the school voucher expander system. So at the end of the last legislative session, the majority tried to force through a massive private school voucher expansion. Now there's already over $300 million that have gone out of from our taxpayer dollars that's supposed to go to public schools, but have been vouchered out to private schools. And I've done sessions, I've done trainings on why that's not a good idea for Indigenous students. Obviously can't do that here, we don't have the time, but it's not a good idea for Indigenous students and probably many others. But Representative Blackwater Nygren, you responded with a moving speech about the murdered children found at private boarding schools across Canada and the US in the past year. So we know there were children taken to boarding schools and only recently have been returned. And I think they're still in the process of returning their bodies to their families. Can you explain the connection and why you voted no? So what's the connection between the voucher expansion and missing or murdered children, Native American children, and why you voted no to the expansion?
Sure. So thank you for lifting that up. And I think as background, it's important to highlight the reason why I was given the opportunity to explain my vote and why I had made that connection. And it's because when I was seeking a funding for Hopi Route 6C specifically, and I wasn't even asking for the entire road to be built or paved. I was asking, I think, for a $5 million appropriation. And the state this past year had, I think, a $12 billion budget to figure out how to spend. And so it was like less than pennies in a bucket that I was asking to pay, you know, at least 2 or 3 miles of Hopi Route 60. And in those conversations, and during budget negotiations, I was asked to vote in favor of the voucher expansion bill, and that in return, I would receive funding and appropriation for certain projects like Hopi 60 and Ganado Loop Road. And I think that as a very young legislator, someone who's a woman, someone who is very new to the legislature, I think that I was specifically targeted for those reasons and was pressured very heavily by the Republicans in the legislature, as well as even Navajo leadership came and lobbied me pretty heavily to vote in favor of the voucher expansion, with the understanding that certain things would be returned to me in response of that vote. So that's kind of the background of why I rose and made that speech on the floor that day. And I was very deeply offended that I was asked to vote in favor of voucher expansion, because as Native Americans, as you had mentioned, we have a very, very long history of our ancestors attending boarding schools, forcibly attending private religious boarding schools against our will, being forcibly taken from our homes, our homelands, and in some instances, never being able to return home. Or if we did return home, there's this long legacy of the trauma and traumatic experiences that those who did attend boarding schools then brought home. And we see the repercussions of that even today. There's a huge amount of intergenerational trauma that has resulted from the boarding school era, as you would call it, and extremely harmful to our Native communities, not just the traumatic experiences, but also the loss of language and culture that entire families and communities faced because of the forced removal from homes. And these Indian boarding schools were open as late as, the 80s and 90s. And the connection between boarding schools and the voucher program, I think, is pretty obvious. If you look at who benefits from the voucher programs and who receives and what schools are being benefited by the voucher programs, and they're largely private religious boarding schools. And so to be asked to further the legacy of boarding schools, it was really just insulting to me as a young person. And especially, this was around the same time that the murdered students' bodies were uncovered in Canada. And, I was also expecting, so, as a new mother and someone who was experiencing all of this as a young woman, as a pregnant woman, as somebody who was recently appointed and then who was asked to do something like this, not just from the Republicans in the legislature, but also from my own tribal leaders. I think that just kind of shows the desperation that our tribal nations are under, because we don't receive anything from the state. And it's extremely difficult to receive any appropriations from the state, as we've been talking about. And so I think that just speaks to how we feel as tribal nations, is that we're willing to put pressure on our own representatives and senators in order to possibly receive this amount of money. So I hope that answers your question. And I think the connection is pretty obvious once you start to really think about it.
Well, again, it comes down to knowing that history. And so many people don't know that history. And it's part of what I do, is try to teach that historical trauma you talked about, but also the resiliency of Native people and how we're still around in spite of all of the things, atrocities and things that have been perpetuated on us. So basically what I got from your answer is that they were holding hostage the repair of roads that have this negative impact on, like we've talked about, on the students going to those schools, on the bus drivers, on the actual equipment, the maintenance, the money that costs to, to put into these transportation, the transportation. So to state it more clearly, if our audience didn't catch that, is that they were willing to approve the Ganado Loop project and maybe the Hopi 60 project, if you and others voted for the expansion of the private school voucher program.
That's correct.
Okay.
Nadine, can I just add
Politics.
something to that?
Of course you may.
Nadine,
Yes.
thank you. I just want to say that for a young legislator, Representative Blackwater Nygren has just showed an immense amount of courage and moral fortitude, and does her family, her community, and her clan so proud, because and I'm very proud of her for the person she is, and because it is an intense, it is pretty traumatic. I remember being a young legislator and being put into those into these conversations where I mean, it's very Hollywood, first of all. Nobody actually comes up to you and says this in real life, but in the Arizona legislature, it is it is a matter of how things go today, day to day. And I just want to go back to one other thing. Yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, and even that was used as leverage for my vote in this in previous times. And we had I this year I did not approach the governor because I just did not want to have the conversation of well, what are you gonna give us, or anything like that, because I haven't been a good legislator as far as bargaining. And so this year, his staff had the language to Indigenous Peoples Day. We had encouraged him last year to use the same language, just change the date, just a rubber stamp it and move it along. And he didn't do it. Senator Steele contacted his office and they said they were not going to proclaim Indigenous Peoples Day for yesterday. So those types of things, those are tactics that are pretty common, and it does impact our communities. And it's really unfortunate because we are doing what we were traditionally told by our ancestors, our headmen and headwomen, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our mothers and fathers, to do the right thing. Do not lie, do not steal, do not kill. And these are things that that we hold ourselves to. And unfortunately, respect is not reciprocated for our Indigenous people. So it is difficult to be that legislator. But I just want to give a shout out to Representative Nygren for holding fast and strong to her beliefs for her people. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, they tried it with the wrong woman. They underestimated you on many levels, and so I echo that applause for your standing up for what you believe in. So, Representative Germain, you are in an urban area of the state. How would you characterize how state law has impacted your constituents and the Native American people that are living in urban areas?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think that we have a little less of the impact that Native Americans who are living on reservations see, just because we are in the urban areas and we benefit from some of the systems that are set up. But even I have a child who's in the Indian Ed program in the Kyrene School District. So even our urban school districts benefit from the Arizona Indian Education Program and from the federal Title VI programs. So having those programs, having the Office of Indian Education fully funded within the Arizona Department of Education, really benefits our students, and that's not something that we have seen from our state legislature. And Nadine, you know this, you used to head up that office. It is horribly understaffed to be able to serve all of our students who are part of those programs. And thankfully, within our school district, we have several staff members who are serving the Indian Education Program, but not having that support from further up in the state does have a trickle-down effect into what kind of programming they're able to offer to our children.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As I mentioned, I was and you know this, the Indian Education Director for about 4.5 years. And I was the only staff member, and I was not funded by state funds. I was paid partially out of Title I funds and Johnson O'Malley funds. And I was able to find some unspent funds to hire a half-time assistant, and that was it for the whole Office of Indian Education. And since they have expanded a bit, but those are temporary positions funded by ESSER funds, which are there to offer support because of COVID and those challenges. So as soon as that money goes away, if it's not reappropriated, then there won't be those additional, I think it's 2 staff members in the Office of Indian Education. So that's temporary. And that's another thing that, our general public is not aware of. So,
Well, and it's when we go back and we look at the impact of the pandemic on our children and our education system too, it's the lack of having access to counselors and social workers within every single public school district. It is not having certain programs. Where we're at, the Gila River Indian community and the Pascua Yaqui tribe fund programs within our local school district to support our Indian Ed program. But really, it's within Native communities, we've seen a lot of death and heartache from COVID-19, and the children are shouldering that, and the children are trying to make up for a lost year of school, and they need more resources from the state to be able to do that.
yeah, and that's a perfect kind of, if we were at the end of our hour, which we're not yet, but would be a perfect segue to introduce the next session, that Indigenous Perspective session. We are going to have a couple of teachers and a counselor on the panel to talk about that, to talk about the impact on them. And if there's, time and they want to share, but the impact on their students as well. And that's something that through, sorry, I mentioned Sun Clan again, but through some of the work we're doing with the school on Gila River Indian community is addressing the impact of COVID on educators and students. So we're working with the school over about 27-month period to help alleviate some of that, or give them ways to cope. Because we're losing teachers out of the classroom. We were losing them already because they weren't getting paid enough, and now we're losing them because of that. And the mental health, the detrimental impacts on mental health because of COVID. So last session, at least one positive bill passed in support of Arizona's Indigenous students. So Representative Teller introduced a bill ensuring that Native students would be permitted to wear cultural regalia, particularly during high school graduation. So that was not allowed in many schools before. And if a student came out with that, they were told to, you can't walk wearing your regalia, et cetera, et cetera. It was prohibited. So tell us how this supports the needs of Indigenous students and why it's a step in the right direction. So any of you can respond to that. Nobody wants to? Okay, Representative Blackwater Nygren, since you're the closest to have graduated from high school, I believe. Were you able to wear regalia when you graduated from high school?
I think that's safe to say. Yes, I did wear regalia to my high school graduation, my undergraduate graduation at Stanford, and my law school graduation at ASU. And it's an extremely important time and moment in our students' lives. Specifically as Native students, I think it's important to note that our Native American students have the lowest graduation rates among any minority group. And so high school graduation is such a unique time, and a time for celebration, not just for the families, but entire communities. And one thing that I think has always been said about being able to wear regalia is that when we wear our cultural traditional regalia, it allows us to be our truest selves, and it allows us to be identified by the holy people as what we would call five-fingered human beings. And so it's so important that we are able to celebrate in this huge milestone. A lot of our Native students don't even get to walk across the stage. And so we are extremely happy that that bill was passed. It was one of the very first bills that I was able to vote for when I was appointed. And so very extremely happy that that bill was passed, and important for our students that they feel represented and included, and that they're allowed to be their true selves in this very important point in their lives. So thank you. I think the other two will probably have more to add to that as well. So
Yes, but why is this a step in the right direction? Senator Peshlikai?
Thank you. I didn't jump to answer that question because the sound went out on my computer when you were asking the questions. But
Oh, okay.
so I think what you're asking is the regalia bill, Teller's regalia bill passing. Why is it a step in the right direction? Am I correct? Okay, thank you. So it's a step in the right direction because it no longer allows school districts that can allow that can tell students that they can't wear their traditional clothes. It makes it so that they cannot bar the students from wearing traditional clothes, and that is important because on the Native Americans lands and the school districts, I know almost everybody wears their Native American outfits, their rug dresses, and their traditional clothing. But it is some school districts that I don't understand that will not allow this, which is the strangest thing. But it is a good thing because it sends a signal, just like yesterday's Indigenous Peoples Day proclamation, that it's okay to be Indigenous. And we shouldn't have to say that, but there is such a deep level of such a deep level of what's the word? I don't want to say racism. Just, when you don't give something importance, and that
Mhm.
is our children's identity, and to acknowledge that culture, dress, and identity is important. And so for our children, it may be the only time that they wear their outfits, but it is meaningful. And so that goes back to Indigenous Peoples Day. We have to, it is incumbent upon us leaders, adults, and women to fight for cultural identity, preservation, and then to tell our children that it is not something to be ashamed of, because that's what we've been it's
We've been
been
told
knocked
for
into our heads
centuries.
quite literally for 5 centuries. Yes. And so I want to thank Representative Teller and Representative I forget who else. It's all these bills have come through several lives at the legislature, H60, Ganado Loop Road, everything, the funding for Indian Education Office, and every year we have to beg that. And after almost a decade at the legislature, it gets pretty tiring. So I'm really hoping that we get a majority in 2022 so we can get some of these priorities done. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings me to, I think, what will be our final question. And what can our audience do to help get laws passed that are beneficial to Indigenous people or communities in Arizona? Representative Germain, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, the audience, use your voice. Call your state representative, call your state senator, email them, use the request to speak system. If you're able to, come down in person to the state legislature when we reconvene in January. As state representatives, we are there to represent you, the people, and we do that best when we listen to you, the people. And just make your voices heard. And for the regalia bill, Nadine, I think it was most impactful for urban Native Americans because we were the ones feeling the discrimination. We were the ones being told we could not wear our regalia. And Phoenix was one of the main relocation centers after the 1956 Indian Relocation Act. So we have a very, very large urban population here in the Phoenix Valley. And for a long time, our children had been told that they were not able to wear the regalia, and they were even prevented from walking in their graduation.
Yeah, that's terrible for all the reasons that you mentioned. But again, going back to that identity and sense of self and self-worth, it's so important that our children have that, and they feel, like I said, the self-worth and the self-confidence, and they know who they are, they know what they want, and they feel worthy to go after it, and that they should get that support from whomever they need it. From whoever they need it. Self-correct my English. So does anybody else, Senator Peshlikai or Representative Blackwater Nigrin, want to mention anything else? What I think, let me just tell you what we're thinking. The Save Our Schools is what I'd love to do. I would love for this to be a launching point for our audience members on and off the reservation to start a grassroots movement. Get your voices heard, be involved, be civically engaged, know you have power, not just as individuals, but when you come together, there's power in the groups. You're the people who are voting these representatives, state representatives in, these legislators into office. If you don't like what you're hearing about what they are not doing or should be doing, or the coercion or the manipulations, whatever you've heard about today, this evening, get out there and let people know, and we can help you. Save Our Schools can help you. I'm the tribal outreach coordinator for Save Our Schools. Contact me. Go to Save Our School, say SOSAZ network.org, and you can find a lot of information there, and especially how to contact us and get help. But we've got a couple of minutes left. Okay, Senator Peshlikai.
Thank you, Nadine. I think one of the things that I would tell folks to do is let's not look all over for a leader. You can be the leader. We need people, Indigenous people, to run for every office in every city, town, and county in Arizona. And that's important because somewhere in our minds, we were told you can only run on the reservations, which is another thing that we need to wipe away from our instinct, or what has been ingrained in us for 500 years, that we are United States citizens. We are citizens of the border towns. We are citizens of Phoenix, Mesa, Tempe. So your children go to a public school in an urban area, run for that city, that school district, run for mine inspector, run for dog catcher. There's a lot of experience that goes into this, and it's actually a way to teach yourself. And our next governor, well, not our next governor, but we're going to have, in my lifetime, we're going to have a Native American governor. We're going to have a Native American senator or congressperson. And we might have a Native American president. And we should not limit ourselves by what we've been told are our limits, but to reach beyond it and be that endless amount of positivity that we hope to seek and find in others. The leader is us. And obviously they have, the legislature and the government has done a lot of harm to public education, but obviously we still have brilliant young people coming out of our education system, and they are ready to work in public service. And sometimes they just need a push.
Yes, thank you so much. That's exactly true. Okay, our time is up unless Representative Blackwater Nigrin has something to say in like 30 seconds.
Sure. Just echoing both what Senator Peshlikai and Representative Germain have said, contacting your legislators, running for office, also vote. I think we saw that in the 2020 election, that Native Americans turned the state of Arizona. We're turning it blue. And so remember to keep that enthusiasm up, especially next year. We have a lot of statewide offices. The legislators are up for re-election. So it's so important that we vote, that we use our voice, that we continue to be heard, and that we make hopefully turn Arizona blue. So
Yes.
let's end on a positive note. We had a lot of heavy conversations this evening, and
Yes.
let's just be optimistic about the future and use our voices.
Yes. Okay. And on that note, I'm telling everybody to stop talking because we're no, continue to use your voices. Thank you so much, ladies. I really appreciate your being here. Words of wisdom. I hope our audience will take forward with them and everybody get involved. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.